Welcome, my fellow attorneys, to the National Bankruptcy Academy video series. I'm your host, Robert Schaller, an attorney with over 34 years of experience and a registered certified public accountant. Today, we'll be discussing Bankruptcy Schedule I with a line-by-line analysis with real-world commentary. I hope you enjoy the video. Every Chapter 7 debtor must file a schedule of current income, identified as Official Form 106I, Schedule I, your income. This statement reveals the debtor's actual income from all sources of income as of the petition date. Current income includes income from all sources, including wages, salary, self-employed income, partnership income, K-1 statement of income, rental income, business income, and professional income, farm income, interest, dividends, family support payments, unemployment compensation, Social Security payments, other governmental assistance, pension, or retirement income, etc. The statement of current income, shown in Schedule I, must be distinguished from the statement of current monthly income, shown in Part 1 of the means test, which reveals the average monthly income as of the 6 full months prior to the petition date. I think the means test's current monthly income statement should have been titled the Statement of Average Monthly Income, for it indicates the 6-month average income. For example, consider a wage-earning doctor who had earned $10,000 per month for the 6 full months preceding the petition date, but was fired 7 days before filing the petition. That doctor would have current income of 0 for Schedule I, but current monthly income of $10,000 for the means test. In Schedule I, the debtor gives the details about the debtor's employment and monthly income of the date the debtor files the form. If the debtor is married and the spouse is living with the debtor, include information about the debtor's spouse, even if the spouse is not filing with the debtor. If the debtor is legally separated and the spouse is not filing with the debtor, do not include information about the non-filing spouse. Let's talk about how to report employment and income. In Part 1 of Schedule I, the debtor fills in employment information for the debtor and, if appropriate, for a non-filing spouse. If either person is more than one employer, attach a separate page with information about the additional employment. In Part 2 of Schedule I, the debtor gives details about the monthly income the debtor currently expects to receive. If the debtor has nothing to report for a line, write 0, don't leave it blank. Show all totals as monthly payments even if income is not received in monthly payments. This causes a common problem. Most debtors are not paid on a monthly basis and are paid weekly or bi-weekly. This requires the debtor to convert the weekly or bi-weekly income into monthly amounts. If the debtor is paid weekly, quarterly, annually, or irregularly, calculate how much income would be by month. If either the debtor or spouse has more than one employer, calculate the monthly amount for each employer separately, and then combine the income information for all employers for that person on lines 2 through 7. One easy way to calculate how much income per month is as follows. Total the payments earned in a year, then divide by 12 to get a monthly figure. For example, if the debtor is paid seasonally, the debtor would simply divide the amount the debtor expects to earn in a year by 12 to get the monthly amount. In Part 2, line 11, fill in amounts that other people provide to pay the expenses the debtor lists on Schedule J, your expenses. For example, if the debtor and a person to whom the debtor is not currently married pay all household expenses together, and the debtor lists all the joint household expenses on Schedule J, the debtor must list the amounts that that person contributes monthly to pay the household expenses on line 11. But on the other hand, if the debtor has a roommate and the debtor divides the rent and utilities, do not list the amount the roommate pays on line 11 if the debtor has listed only the debtor's share of those expenses on Schedule J. As discussed, it is imperative to note that the income the debtor reports on Schedule I may be different from the income the debtor reports on other bankruptcy forms. Again, for example, the Chapter 7 statement of your current monthly income, Official Form 122A-1, uses a different definition of income and applies that definition to a different period of time. Schedule I asks about the income that the debtor now receives, while the means test asks about income the debtor received in the 6-month period before filing the bankruptcy petition. So now let's turn our attention to this bankruptcy form with a line-by-line analysis with real-world commentary. I hope you enjoy the video. So now let's look at the official schedule Form 106I. At the top, you'll see the familiar fill in this information box. That's where we identify the debtor and the spouse and the district where the bankruptcy case will be filed. So let's fill that in. Debtor 1 in our case is George Washington, and of course Martha Washington is the example we've been using throughout. So let's fill in debtor 1, George Washington. And debtor 2, Martha Washington. And the United States Bankruptcy Court we're going to be filing in, the Eastern District of Virginia. So let's use the pull-down menu. Scroll down, and I'm looking for the Eastern District of Virginia, and there it is, and I'm going to click on it. Next is the case number. We're going to be filing the Schedule I with the petition, and consequently, there is no case number to fill in by the debtor. When the petition is filed with the schedules, then the clerk of the U.S. Bankruptcy Court will be applying a bankruptcy case, and electronically they'll put a number on this document. So the debtor or debtor's counsel does not have to do that. If, on the other hand, this was an amended Schedule I, or if this Schedule I was filed after the petition was filed, then the debtor would know the bankruptcy case number and would apply this bankruptcy case number. So here again, we're going to assume this case was filed with the petition and the Schedule I was filed with the petition at the same time. Now, what happens, though, if this is an amended Schedule I? If it's an amended Schedule I, we go over here to the right, and it says check if this is an amended filing, and we would check this box. Since it's an amended filing, it means by definition there had to have been an earlier filing of the petition so that there would be a known case number. So we'd have to go back over here under the case number and insert the case number. But in this particular case, George and Martha Washington are filing Schedule I at the same time they're filing a petition, so there would be no case number for the form. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to come over and uncheck the amended filing box. Now note on this Schedule I, there's another box that we didn't see on the other schedules. And this box says, a supplement showing post-petition Chapter 13 income as of the following date. So this is the Chapter 7 case, so we would ignore this box. Now let's go down and look at Official Form 106I, Schedule I, your income, and let's read the directions. The directions say, quote, be as complete and accurate as possible. If two married people are filing together, debtor 1 and debtor 2, both are equally responsible for supplying correct information. If you are married and not filing jointly, and your spouse is living with you, include information about your spouse. If you are separated and your spouse is not filing with you, do not include information about your spouse. If more space is needed, attach a separate sheet to this form. Now let's look at Part 1 of Schedule I. So I'll scroll down. Part 1 is titled Describe Employment, and line 1 directs the debtor to fill in employment information. Notice that there's two columns, one labeled Debtor 1 and the next column Debtor 2 or non-filing spouse. Every case has to have at least one debtor by definition, so column 1 is always completed. Column 2, though, is sometimes completed, but sometimes not completed. That depends on the marital status and relationship status of the debtor. If the debtor is married and the debtor's spouse is filing jointly, then of course the debtor's spouse's information is included here. If the debtor is married but the debtor's spouse is not filing the case but lives with the debtor, then debtor's spouse information is also included in column 2. But if the debtor is separated or divorced and the income is not shared, then debtor 2 column is not completed and left blank. In this particular case of George and Martha Washington, they are filing jointly, so both columns will be completed. So remember, debtor 1 is George Washington and debtor 2 is Martha Washington. So let's begin filling out the form. It's to ask for the employment status of George Washington. So I'm going to click employed because he is self-employed. So I click the employed box. Under occupation, we're going to list self-employment. And notice, by the way, I complete one column before I go to the next column. You could go across, but I think that would be confusing and can lead to errors. So I'll complete debtor 1, and then I'll move over to debtor 2. On employer's name, since he is self-employed and he is a sole proprietor, this would be left blank. If, on the other hand, the George Washington was not self-employed, but instead employed by a corporation he owned, then I would put down the employer's name as the corporation for which the debtor works, even though he owns that corporation. But here, George Washington is a sole proprietor, so we're putting down self-employed and not putting down the employer's name or address. And then at the bottom says, how long has he been employed there? George Washington has worked 6 years at a sole proprietorship. Now let's move over to debtor 2, Martha Washington. She also is employed, so I'm going to check the employed box. And then the occupation, she's a teacher. And now we're going to fill in the employer's name. The Willow School District. And the employer's address. And the city, state, and zip. And she also has worked 6 years as a teacher. Let's scroll down to line 2. Line 2 is part of Part 2. And Part 2 is titled, Give Details About the Monthly Income. And the directions say, quote, estimate monthly income as of the date you file this form. If you have nothing to report for any line, write $0 in the space. Include your non-filing spouse unless you are separated. If you or your non-filing spouse have more than one employer, combine the information for all employers for that person on the lines below. If you need more space, attach a separate sheet. So now you'll see the same 2 columns, one for debtor 1 and one for debtor 2 or non-filing spouse. So let's look at line 2. Line 2 states, list monthly gross wages, salary, and commissions. And that is parenthetically says before all payroll deductions. So we're looking again for the gross amount, not the net amount that the debtor takes home, but the gross amount. If not paid monthly, calculate what the monthly wage would be. Now for debtor 1, he's self-employed, and so 0 would be the appropriate number for the debtor. Because this line 2 talks about wages, salary, and commission. And since the debtor is self-employed, he doesn't pay himself a wage, salary, or commission. Instead, his profits come from the net income of his business. Line number 3 says estimate and list the monthly overtime. Again, that'd be 0 for George Washington because he's self-employed. And line 4, calculate the gross income. I'm adding lines 2 and 3 for George Washington, which again would be 0. Now let's complete lines 2, 3, and 4 for Martha Washington. Martha Washington is a school teacher, and she is paid a salary twice a month. And she receives $2,000 gross twice a month. So remember to distinguish between gross and net income. Gross is the total amount of income that's earned, not the net amount, which is what she takes home. So since she's paid $2,000 twice a month, that's $4,000 in a month. So we'll include $4,000 here on line 2. Next, estimate and list monthly overtime pay. She does not receive overtime pay, so that would be 0. And then line 4, calculate the gross income, adding lines 2 and 3. That'd be $4,000. So let's scroll down. At the top of the form, it says copy line 4 here. So I'm just going to copy the line 4. It'll help for the calculations. And the information here is simply the same number as the numbers on line 4. So let's scroll down to see line 5. Now let's examine line 5 of Schedule I. Line 5 is titled List All Payroll Deductions, and you'll see several subparts, 5A through 5H. These are all deductions from the paycheck. So that means by definition, the debtor has to have a paycheck for there to be any deductions for the paycheck. In George Washington's case, he's self-employed and does not receive a paycheck. Instead, his income is just the net income from his business. So there are no payroll deductions, therefore $0 with the appropriate line for lines 5A through 5H. So let's put them in.